I'm Robin Ewing, and with Michael Anderson, I co-direct the CREATE Centre. Creativity in Research, Transforming the Arts. Creativity in Research, Engaging the Arts, Transforming Education, Health and Wellbeing. You'd think I'd get that right, wouldn't you? We're in for a treat this afternoon in terms of thinking about coming back to school through the arts with Professors Peter O'Connor and Adjunct Professor Julie Dunn. And we want to thank you all for joining at such short notice, but it is, I think, such a really important area for us to think about as our children return to school. Before we start though, we would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the First Nations Australians who are the original storytellers in our country. We want to thank them for the wonderful care that they have taken of this land over many, many thousands of years. And we want to acknowledge that arts and story and the arts are at the centre of Aboriginal ways of doing, being, knowing and becoming. And we have much to learn from them. The University of Sydney stands on Gadigal land. I'm coming to you from Darug country. You might like to acknowledge the country that you are zooming in from. We also want to acknowledge that Aboriginal land was never ceded. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And Michael, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce our wonderful guests.
Thanks so much, Robin. And I'd like to acknowledge I as well am on Gadigal land. So we're so excited this afternoon to be inviting Peter and Julie to speak to us. Many of you will know Peter and Julie's work over many years. Peter, of course, is from the University of Auckland and is the director of the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation. His work has spanned mental health, crisis recovery, and really anywhere where the arts has been applied to make a difference in the lives of people, young people, old people, all sorts of people. And so it's really exciting to hear some of the work that Peter's been doing. And Julie Dunn, of course, is adjunct professor, as Robin's mentioned, at Griffith University. And her work in education, particularly early childhood and primary education, has been stupendous. It's just covered such a fantastic area and has made such a contribution to the way we think about early childhood learning. And together they form such a wonderful team. So I'm not going to speak anymore. We're going to drop the YouTube channel into the chat, and we're going to drop the CREATE membership into the chat for those of you who want to join. But that's enough from us. We're going to hand over to Peter and Julie.
O ngā mihi nui a koutou, ngā rangatira I ngā hoa hoki, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm speaking here from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the rohi that I'm in is in the iwi that is mana whenua. People of the land here is Ngāti Whātua. So my greetings to you who sit and stand on the lands of our ancestors. I've had the privilege of working in schools in multiple disasters for many years. And as I'm looking across at the picture behind Michael of the University of Sydney, I'm reminded that in January of last year, I was in Sydney working with teachers as they returned to school after the bushfires. And I remember Sydney, at that time, people were wandering around in masks to protect themselves from the dust and the smoke of the fires. I remember a Sunday afternoon here in Tamaki Makaurau of the sky being black from the smoke drifting across the Tasman Sea, and never dreaming of the 18 months to 2 years that we've had both here and in Australia. I've before that I've worked in multiple earthquake zones, including Christchurch for many years after the earthquake, Mexico City after the earthquake, and back in Christchurch after the terror attacks. So I have a sense of what happens in crisis, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, and to talk in particular of the possibilities and opportunities that schools have, because they always sit in the very center and heart of communities. And it's because of that and the extraordinary work that they're able to do both during crisis and after crisis, and imagining what that might be, and imagining it bigger and more important perhaps than individual achievement, especially if it's individual achievement in small parts of the curriculum. And I'm delighted today to have my colleague and friend and cousin, Professor Julie Dunn. She's an O'Connor, you can tell she is. She's damn fine looking and smart as well. So it's lovely to have my cousin bro joining me from Griffith. And Julie was one of the first people I reached out to when we were looking at how we might support schools coming back last year after lockdown. And I've got some questions, and we'll have some dialogue in a minute, Julie. But I just wanted to put some context around some things that I know from working in disaster zones. And the first thing, I guess, is that earthquakes always magnify and amplify the geographic fault lines. So, you know, an earthquake finds the weak points in the Earth's crust and shifts and shakes that. And that's what happens in disaster, and it's what's happened in COVID. So that it's magnified and amplified the social fault lines. And that's definitely happened here in Aotearoa, and we know that's the case in Australia. So what it's meant is that our most vulnerable communities, our Indigenous communities, our communities of colour, our young and our old, they are the ones who bear the brunt. The issues of poverty, of glaring inequality fueled by years of greed, have been amplified by a disaster, so that we can't help but see the results of neoliberal politics, both here in Australia and New Zealand, being played out right across our cities. I know too that schools during crisis are the glue. And I can see my good friend Linda Stewart is a principal of a local school. And I know, because I know Linda and I know her school, that during the last 10 weeks of lockdown, they will have been holding much of that community together, and that they will have been doing that with food parcels. They will be doing that by checking in on families, by making those connections, by doing all the kinds of things that happen when the fabric of your society is already torn. So I know that during COVID, in the really hard hit parts of a city like Auckland, or the hard hit parts of a city like Sydney, that it's the principals who carry the weight. It's the teachers who carry the weight. They're teaching online, they're in schools as well as the lockdown sort of come out. You know, we're going back and, you know, COVID spreading across the city. And it's our senior schools who go back next week, unprotected. And those are the kinds of decisions and choices that are made. And I know that when schools reopen, it becomes a marker for many people of a return to normal. It's kind of almost the first step out. I remember the huge pressure on Christchurch schools when 185 people were killed in a devastating earthquake. A huge pressure on those schools to reopen when they weren't ready, when they weren't safe to go back in. But the political push to have them reopen as a sign that the city was coming back was really enormous. So there's this political push to get schools back before they're ready. And then there's two other pushes which happen around schools when they open up. There's a push to catch up with learning, and it's fed from this, from what Paulo Freire describes as the banking deposit system of education, so that you have these empty buckets, these empty pails, and the job of a teacher is to fill it up. And by God, if they've lost 10 weeks of learning, the bucket can't be filled up fast enough. And then you get a bonkers type of academics who say the bucket starts to leak and they lose their learning. So you're going to have to work even faster to fill that bucket up when they come back. And that's covered in all sorts of, that pressure will, comes on schools, that in the midst of a pandemic that's killed people, that's tipped the place on the world on its head, there's this kind of mad rush to catch up on learning. And the other part of the return to normal is this advice that schools should go back and get straight back to routine, as if nothing's happened. It's going to be very difficult to do that in Tamaki Makaurau, because kids will go back in masks. They'll go back and they won't be able to physically connect and to build all those kinds of things that they do normally. So that push will be even more difficult. One of the things about living in a country like New Zealand in the last 10 years is that I think we've learned differently. And we learned a lot from Christchurch teachers. The Ministry of Education said then, go back to school and focus on literacy and numeracy. I have a wonderful memory. I can't even remember the name of the Minister of Education at that time, deliberately blocked from my memory, but I do remember her saying that they should go back and focus on literacy and numeracy. And another piece of advice after an earthquake, for some strange reason, was to wash your hands, which I thought was a wonderful metaphor, because the ministry washed their hands of the schools in Christchurch. But what I do remember was that Christchurch principals and Christchurch teachers said, stuff off. We're not doing that. Actually, when our kids come back, our focus will be on well-being. Our focus will be on caring for our kids. And that's what we'll do. And I went down, and as I said before, I worked in there for a long time. But one of the things that always struck me was that there was that focus on well-being, but the curriculum didn't shift and change. So it was kind of, we went back, and then what people didn't think of taking the opportunity to work with stories and fictions and all these kinds of things to unpick and unpack some of the deeper kinds of things which happened underneath. So the things that have informed my work in COVID and Julie's work when I asked her to be part of Torito Toy, an online resource to support schools when they return after crisis, are these things. Slow is better than faster. You don't have to rush back to learning. You don't have to rush back to those kinds of things. That might be more important. In fact, it is more important to catch up with relationships first before you catch up with what you've lost in the learning. All of us who are teachers on this site know that at the heart of all teaching is the quality of relationship. So if your kids have been locked up for months on end, the key thing that you do when you bring them back, the key thing that you've got to do when you bring them back is to catch up with each other and to catch up with you at a very personal, human level. You know, it's so important. We can't pretend. We don't have the luxury of pretending COVID didn't happen. And that when they come back to school, they go to the important things. You know, our secondary schools in New Zealand come back next week because the important thing is a bloody exam. God, are we still in the 1900s, 1800s? Really? The most important thing in the middle of a pandemic is a bloody external exam. And for that purpose, we'll reopen our schools. It's extraordinary. So one of the things that I think with Torito Toy was that we understood a focus on well-being, a focus on relationship, a focus on play, and a focus on the arts. And a focus on the arts because it's the arts that are uniquely powerful in doing what I just talked about, slowing down learning, creating spaces for children to build positive, meaningful relationships again with each other. Because you know how they do that? They do that with their hands. They do it with their bodies. They do it with their whole selves. So that's what we made. We made Torito Toy last year after lockdown, 300,000 page views, now used in 140 countries around the world, because we had the New Zealand Principals Federation, the NZEI Te Reo, the Te Reo Roa, the New Zealand Primary Teachers Union support the work. It got picked up. And then yesterday, you know, we're thinking that Auckland schools will open in the next couple of months. And yesterday I got a letter from the Associate Minister of Education, Jan Tinetti, who said that they're going to endorse the return of primary schools in Auckland through Torito Toy. So we're really excited about that. That's how we'll go back. We'll go back slowly. We'll go back through the arts. We'll go back through the power of fiction. We'll go back playing together. And that's the segue to my great cousin bro, Professor Julie Dunn. Julie, this is a question. Why is it important, and I know you know the answer to this, why is it important for children to come back and play rather than come back and work? Or is that a binary that doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, you beat me to it. Hey, Peter. Hello, everybody. And, you know, we're not really cousins, but it's a good pretend. It's a good pretend thing we have going on because my mother's name was O'Connor. And I think the ingredients for me of play and playfulness are several. So one aspect of play is it allows you to be other and to explore other perspectives. And so one of the things for the children is that they will probably have witnessed so much in the news, so much in terms of what they've seen in their own families and communities. And you know, what play gives children the chance to do is to explore those ideas and have the agency to kind of work through it with other children. There's a famous book by George Eisen, I think Eisen, called Children and Play in the Holocaust. And if we're talking about one of the most horrendous crises in humankind, it was the, you know, children being taken to, you know, concentration camps during World War II in the Holocaust. And those children made sense of their experience by playing out stories about, you know, separating the clothing of the dead and going to the, you know, they were actually playing on the way to their own demise, which shows you the power of play as a meaning-making tool for children. So I would straight away say that what's important is that play gives children the chance to make meaning without an adult kind of layering it onto them. It's a chance for them to negotiate meaning, and I think that's really important. The second thing is play, by its very nature, is hugely social. So it's important that children have a chance to engage with each other and negotiate in playful contexts without too much adult control. And the powers that be might look in and see a room full of children playing and wonder what learning's going on. Well, we know there's a lot of learning going on when children, and when I talk about children, I'm not just talking about kindergarten kids or prep kids. I'm talking about playfulness for children. My PhD was in the play of 11 and 12-year-olds, and boy, do they love to play if you just give them the chance. So we're not just talking about young children engaging in play. So it's about that social dimension of play. That's really critical. And children, a lot of children, you know, in families where they're a single child or they're separated by a significant age group who've been in lockdown, they will not have had a lot of chance to engage in negotiating play and social engagement with other children. So they're going to need time to do that, to kind of re-establish their relationships and even think about the kinds of play that they might engage in. And that's where the adult comes in. So the adult's got a huge job to play in creating shared context for play. So the children have been working in their own little worlds, and what we've got to do is kind of co-create dramatic worlds where the children can come together and work in the same play context. Our job as educators is to kind of help them kind of land on a context for play and then to support them. So we need that social aspect of play as well. And some of them may be fortunate and have had parents who were willing to play with them. But most of the parents, let's face it, have been so busy on Zoom meetings and kind of trying to keep their own self together that, you know, actually having time to play with their children may not have been something that they've done. So the children may be play starved, if you like. And we do know that children's language develops through play. We know their social emotional competence develops through play. We know that that children's empathy develops through play. So there's a huge, massive body of literature about this. So, and we're not just talking about dramatic play. We're talking about children can playfully engage with music. They can playfully engage with media. They can playfully engage with the other arts. And our job as educators, I think, when the children return to school, is to kind of land on some shared context. Because what we don't want is, we can't have a classroom where the children are all playing about different things. Sure, they need agency while they play, but one of the powerful things we can do through the arts is to create some shared context. And I think that's one of the fantastic things that Rito Toi does as a resource. And for those of you who don't know how to find it, because it is particularly challenging. It's not a term, obviously. It's a Maori term, and Peter might talk about what it means. But it's TERITOTOI. So, and if as soon as you start typing in Te Rito, it will come up because, as Peter said, it's been getting hundreds of hits from all over the world. So, one of the important aspects of Te Rito Toi is that the resources in there give teachers some ideas about how to identify contexts that are tried and tested, and how to use those contexts to build playful opportunities for children to engage with. So, lots of teachers are really highly creative and they won't need this resource, but I think we're kind of all a little bit frazzled. We've been incredibly lucky here in Queensland, but from talking to colleagues in other parts of the country and overseas, there's been some challenging work. So if the resource is there, why not kind of use it as a springboard? So those are the important things for me about play and playfulness, and and the return to school is the time and space, the agency, and then with the agency comes the voice. And children's voice is critical in this, that just the time for them to be and to negotiate and to, kind of reestablish, as Peter said earlier, those connections with others. So if we want to catch up, my argument would be we don't catch up through the binary of work and play, because I don't see them as a binary. I see them as being completely interconnected.
Yeah, it's a great shame and that we ever separated those two things out, especially for children. I always say to people, come to the university and play with me for a bit rather than come and work with me. We did some research last year on looking at 8 schools who'd used Torito Toy as their way back, and just picking up on some of your ideas there, Julie, that they use the arts. Some of them, they all had this, many of them had this idea of teachers that what was really important was to create a safe space for children to come back to school. And, ministries and all over the world, there's been a real push around the physical safety. And I get that. It's absolutely important, whether it's ventilation, masks, numbers of children and so forth, but there's this other health, which is our mental health and well-being. And what is it that we're doing in schools as around that? And so how are we making schools safe places? And the resources were used in different ways and different understandings of safety. So for some teachers, and I really get this, that after months of lockdown, when you come back to the joy and the wonder and the pleasure of making art with others, and the great joy of that, and the possibility of that kind of blaze of color that's possible in a classroom when you paint together, when you draw together, when you laugh together, when you move together, when you sing together, when you do all those kinds of things. It's a safe return because the arts have always been, at one level, a form of leisure, a form of distraction from the world. You know, young people that we talked to, when we talked to teachers about Torito Toy last year, for many of them, they said the overwhelming worry that children had when they came back to school was that their grandparents were going to die. And so we kind of forget that at one level. We sort of think kids are worried about their learning, they're worried about this and they're worried about that, and they're missing their friends. But what was actually I found that just gut-wrenching, and hoped and prayed that there'd be adults in classrooms who could talk to kids about that and what that meant to be scared that your parents and grandparents were going to die, that there'd be an adult somewhere who could pick that up in a safe way with kids. So there's that distraction. And part of that distraction, and we've just done some new work with a Tongan artist, Dagmar Dyke, who's also an acting principal of a large school here in Auckland. And she does this beautiful visual arts activity with the children. And what she says is, and we know this in the arts, is that while you're busy sitting next to a child and you're making something with them and you're both busy with your hands, you can have parallel conversations, really deep ones, really powerful ones, the kinds of conversations that truly matter to children. It's in those kinds of moments that actually, and building them so that you can have them with children is so important. It's not standing at the front of the room and saying, so how was lockdown, everybody? Which is about the worst. Yeah, because for some people, it's been bloody hell on wheels. But for a 7-year-old to sit with a teacher who they love, and the teacher loves them, and making something beautiful, they can have a conversation together, that's priceless. And that's what was happening with the playfulness. You know, it's fascinating. I've got a 2.5-year-old granddaughter. We play together, and as we play and make and build, she's talking. So we went to the playground yesterday, and she'd got a fright a week before, and yesterday we went to the playground. She went down the slide, and all the way home, she was holding my hand, and she said, "I was brave, Pop Pop. I was brave." And it was because we were walking together, and we'd done something together, we'd played together, that she could tell me about her bravery. And that's, when you're 2.5, working out when you're brave is damn important, and you should be able to do that with your teacher. And then the final thing, and your work's beautiful around this, Julie, and the dramas that you gave us for Torito Toy, is that the fiction allows us safely to explore real world issues. And so we found that with the children and the teachers, when we looked at what they were doing, they picked up your drama, for example, the Green Children one, and weeks of really intense cross-curricular work exploring the Green Children. And there was something about coming back to school last year where that really resonated with kids. So an easy question for you again, and don't say we're not cousins. The lovely thing, Julie, is this whole business of how fiction provides a safe place. Can you talk a little bit about that for kids? Not just for kids.
Yeah, not just for kids, for all of us. But I think the Green Children drama was an interesting one. So when Peter asked us to contribute to the Rito Toi website, John O'Toole and I, by the way, is a co-author of a book that some of these dramas originally were written for. So originally, I'd written the Green Children drama, and it's for those of you who don't know process drama, it always has a focus question. So the children and the teachers collaborate in a drama experience over several lessons, sometimes, you know, intensively in over a couple of days straight. And by the way, I would encourage that if you're going to use some of these dramas, is not to kind of go, well, let's engage and now let's walk away and do maths, but actually let's give kids the time to really dig in and become deeply engaged and just kind of allow the kind of the form, the aesthetic of drama work or visual art or whatever to sit with them rather than kind of using it in a 40-minute slot. So, you know, if you're allowed to, and I hate that word, but if your school timetable allows you to have some flexibility, children love having extended engagement with a dramatic world or an artistic world. So the Green Children drama originally was written with a focus which was pretty much directed towards these, you know, the stories about a couple of green kids who turn up in this community, and the children create the community and they draw and map and design and become the people of this town where these two green children have mysteriously arrived. And it's a traditional tale that's got various versions that are known all over the world. But in the original writing of the drama, my idea was, you know, was very much to focus on the fear of people who are different, the fear of, you know, of people who look different to us. I mean, in this case, the children, these two green children turned up in front of a cave. No one knew where they were coming from. And obviously the drama, you know, it's clearly the undertones there are about celebration of difference and kind of it's got a very, eventually the penny drops for the kids and they go, actually this drama is about racism, isn't it? But for Torito Toy, it developed a different life. So what was always kind of a marginal factor in the Green Children drama, which was someone would always say, what if they're contagious? What if these green kids have got something and we can catch it? And every time I've done this drama, and I've done it a lot of times, that kind of comes up, but pretty much it doesn't kind of have a huge emphasis because we kind of move on and there's all kinds of things happen in the drama. But having had the chance to look at the gallery that the teachers have loaded, or the teachers in New Zealand who've done the drama and have uploaded the children's writing and uploaded the children's artwork and images of them doing the drama, and you can see those on the website. It's clear that that kind of fear of the pandemic and the contagion and so on became a really big thing for the children, not surprisingly. But the nice thing is it's distanced by time. The drama's set in a more historic time where communications aren't so great and people have to write letters to each other. And it's also distanced through the fiction, that they're pretending to be people other than themselves in a fictional situation. So the distance enables the kids to talk about these issues, to actually step into the shoes of people who might be afraid or might be concerned or might be just downright angry about something. But it's not them. And it's not their town. It's not a drama set in Auckland or Sydney or Melbourne. It's a drama set in a town which the children create their own name for. The drama doesn't even have a set town. The children create it. So I think what's important about that drama in transforming it from a drama which had a focus on celebration of difference, because what happens in the end of the drama is the green girl kind of pretty much gives away all of her what makes her unique, and she becomes just like everybody else. Her color actually fades so that she's no longer green. Her brother, he kind of fades away. We're not sure what happens to him, but we certainly know that the green girl gives up everything about herself that's unique and different. And the kids know that from the start. They know the whole story before we even start exploring it. So I think it's been interesting to see how the kids have taken both the pandemic aspect, but also I saw a piece of writing where one of the kids had written #Green Lives Matter. So, you know, I think that was kind of interesting to see that, you know, the kids are obviously making connections to the real world, but they're doing it in that kind of environment where they're free to express different opinions, step into different people's shoes, and that the drama provides the distance that allows them to have that common and somewhat playful space to engage in. But then the important thing about drama, of course, is that the reflective phase must give the kids the chance to then kind of draw the analogy, to talk about what they want to say and how it's like the real world. And that's where there's an opportunity to kind of have those deep conversations that Peter was talking about before, not just with the teacher, but with each other. And, you know, that kind of thoughtful, reflective discussion about what was this drama actually about? What did we explore here? And what did we learn?
Thanks, Julie. And you know, it's beautiful work. And I'd say David's put up the link. You can have a look. One of the other extraordinarily powerful and useful parts of Torito Toy was the work that Robin Ewing did in curating with John Saunders, a collection of picture books, which are such powerful ways to work with children at any time, but particularly after disaster. And so these lovely books where you can open them up and talk, for example, about courage, where you can talk about what it's like to be scared, where you can talk about what it's like to not feel good about the world, when you're not talking about yourself, but you're talking about inside the story. So that's one of the great gifts. And talking to the teachers and the research last year, and them saying, you know, what was great for us is we got this idea. You know, the other thing that, and I'm going to show you the latest book that we've just put up, because it's gorgeous. It would just show you the author reading part of it. Rito Toi, we've always said, was research informed and research led. It comes from years and years and years of understanding the role and the place of the arts in schools. We know that it makes a difference to inferential comprehension. We know it makes a difference to literacy and numeracy. We know it makes a difference to arts and wellbeing. We understand it has a particular role post disaster, and it gave permission for many, many teachers, not necessarily to use those resources or the way we'd written them, but to go, you know what? I'm going to go back. And I remember 20 years ago when we used to learn how to do the arts at university when we trained to be a teacher, I could do that stuff again because it's the same thing. It's the same idea. You know, there's a glorious image on the gallery, an old drama that I did in Christchurch called Teaspoon of Light, got turned into a korowai of gratitude. A korowai for our Australian friends is a cloak. And what the kids did was to create a cloak big enough to drape the entire boundary of the school. And it's a cloak of gratitude where they thank their community for. It's the most wonderful thing, and they left it up there as a cloak to just kind of dissipate in the weather. And those photos online are enormously powerful. I never dreamed that the resource that I wrote, Teaspoon of Light, would become a korowai of gratitude on a fence. And that's the wonder of teachers, isn't it? Because they're such creative, imaginative, practical kinds of people. They go, oh, thanks for that idea, but I'm not going to take any of that. I'm now going to make this instead. And it's the freedom to do that, which I love about Torito Toy. And it's very different, isn't it, to going back and, you know, I just saw something there from Elaine saying in Singapore, you know, their Minister of Education just announced that their focus will be on academic recovery. Oh, poor buggers. I mean, really? I mean, how awful. Christmas is coming up. What are you going to do? Recover? I mean, even the phrase academic recovery is kind of repulsive, isn't it? You know, but, you know, or even worse, just ministry bureau speak. This, we've just been working with the Sir John Kirwan Foundation. For our Australian friends, Sir John Kirwan is a former All Black. They're the world champ, or they're rugby players. Sorry, Julie. And we've been working with them, and they've given us a lovely book for us to work on when schools reopen after this lockdown. God knows when that will be, but it will be at some point. And I'll just play you the opening bit of it, and you can see all these ideas of safety are all there in this. If I've got this right, share screen.
Kia ora tamariki, ko Malcolm Clark tōku ingoa, ko kai tuhi tuhi o te puka puka tu Mike Tuatara. And I'm going to read to you today. It's a story by me, Malcolm Clark, and the illustrations are done by Phlox. It's also published by Little Love. Tu Mike Tuatara, a little kindness goes a long way. Near the edge of the forest, on a cliff top by the sea, lived a grouchy tuatara by the name of Tahi. Curled up tightly in a ball, Tahi never left his burrow. He just couldn't face the world with a heart so full of sorrow. Then one morning, Tahi woke up, feeling extra blue. He heard a call from high above. It was Roger the Ruru. Kei te pia koe, my friend, Roger said with a smile. Thought I'd say g'day, mate. Haven't seen you in a while. Can you see Roger the Ruru? Tahi sighed and took a breath, then looked up at the sky. Mate, he said, I'm feeling sad and I just can't work out why. Bummer, bro, Roger said. Sorry to hear you're glum. Come with me. I have an idea. I think you need some fun.
So it starts a lovely story and a set of process dramas. And look at the illustrations, the possibilities of what you can play with these wonderful native animals here, birds, you know, the tuatara and the ruru, the night owl. And what we do with those kids and what the story does as you work into the story, tuatara starts to help others who feel like him. And suddenly the world changes for him. So there is a level of didactic kind of thinking in there, but if you go into the story and underneath the story and play, the whole idea of how you might be, and I just love this thing where tuatara can say to his friend, I'm feeling sad and I just can't work out why. And that's a really important thing for 7 and 8 year olds and 9-year-olds at the moment and 60-year-olds like me. I'm feeling sad and I just can't work out why. And I love Roger's response, bummer, bro. He doesn't kind of overanalyze it. He doesn't psych the whole thing up. He just kind of goes, yeah, I'm your friend. And so Roger becomes a really important part of the story that we get to play with as part of this new resource. So I don't know, I would imagine, and I know, and Robin's got 100,000 kinds of books which open all that up for children, because that's what we do in the kind of drama work and the arts work that we do. Michael, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stop talking.
Peter, can I just throw something in though? I do remember being in Toowoomba at an early childhood conference. For those of you who remember seeing those horrific scenes of cars washing through the streets of Toowoomba after one of the Brisbane floods, it was absolutely horrendous. And the Queensland government actually, Jackie French wrote this beautiful book, which was about the bravery and the courage of the people who cleaned up after the flood. And the story was told through the eyes of a golden Labrador dog who witnessed not just the flood, but the recovery and the mud army who came in afterwards. And I was standing looking at this book and had so many teachers come up to me who said, oh, it's a beautiful book, but I could never use it with my children because it would make them sad. And there was a concern that if you address something that the children have been through, that you're kind of revisiting the trauma. And I'm not a therapist and I'm not a psychologist, but I do know in my heart that ignoring it is not the thing to do. Pretending that the flood never happened to those children in Toowoomba is like pretending that, that the world is flat. Those children experienced great trauma. So, but what that story did is what I was saying before, and what Peter's, the explanation there of the birds, and is that it gave the distance to talk about the dog's feelings and what the dog saw and how the dog responded. And that's the beauty of children's literature. It's also the beauty of music. It gives that space for children to be reflective and to connect, but without the direct pain. So, I think sometimes we can be afraid that we're going to tap into emotion. And Gavin Bolton says that what drama does in particular doesn't protect us from emotion, but protects us into emotion. And I think we need to kind of certainly be careful with children's emotions, but we do need to kind of understand that our responsibility is not to avoid, but to find ways to embrace and support. So that's just a kind of easy for me to say. I'm not there in those classrooms having those tough conversations, and I do acknowledge that it can be very difficult sometimes. But so I think that anecdote reminds us that it can't be business as usual when we return. These children have changed. Their lives have changed, their way of seeing the world has changed, and we can't pretend otherwise. So
there's something about the pretending otherwise, that if we do that, we disrespect how they felt about the world. That it doesn't count, it doesn't matter, that there's something else that's more important. I've been reading Zemblias's Pedagogy of Discomfort lately, and it's extraordinary work from Melbourne. And Lob as well, with strategic empathy, a whole range of people thinking about these kinds of things. I'm always reminded, when my mother died, I was just a young teacher, and everyone else on the staff came up and said how sorry they were, except one woman. And about 6 months later, her mother died. And I went up to her and I said, I'm so sorry to hear your mum died. And she said, oh, Peter, she said, I didn't know what to say when your mum died, and I wished I had, and now I know. And, it's just, Paulo Freire gets it right, doesn't he? The purpose of education is to make us more fully human, and for some reason we don't talk about grief, we don't talk about how the world sits on its end. We're an impoverished kind of education system. Michael, are there questions, are there thoughts, are there ideas that people want to share? Because we'll blabber on, Julie and I.
Well, I've certainly got a bunch of thoughts and ideas. One of the things that occurred to me in the kind of deluge of ideas from Zimbalist to Freire to is the rise of effectivism as a way of understanding the world. And I've put a link to a Nature article that talks about effectivism and how effectivism is being understood. And I think the stuff that we're talking about with affect, the stuff we're talking about empathy is really critical. I want to bring it back though, while people kind of think about the kind of questions they might have. and by the way, just put your hand up emoji up there or just type something in the chat. The question I have is really around the many teachers that are on this Zoom this afternoon. Where do they start to work in this way? And after they've kind of done all they can with Torito Toy, where do they go from there? Like, what's the life cycle of this? Is Torito Toy meant to be just a moment, or is it meant to be a way of doing and being in a classroom?
I was in the meeting I was in with Associate Minister for Education, who is a former principal. The head of the Teachers Union, and the Teachers Union in New Zealand at primary represents over 90% of primary teachers. And he said to the minister this, he said, you know, I don't know another resource ever to have the same cut through with teachers as Torito Toy. There was a need for this at that time. And he said, and the thing is, it shouldn't just be for crisis. This shouldn't be we've got the world's tipped on its end, here's the arts. It actually should be, and it should be, the arts should be there. And if they ran through schools, the kinds of things that Julie's talking about, which is fictional ways to understand ourselves, the blazes of colour, the affective rather than the effective, all those kinds of things just become the common currency of schools. It was kind of like last year. It was needed because all the teachers seemed to know that the barren kind of academic recovery modes of the transmission, the fill the bail stuff, the pale stuff, doesn't work. We all know it. The emperor's got no clothes. Yeah, Julie might have a better answer than that. I hope so.
Julie might be on mute.
Which is a good idea. No, I think you're absolutely right, and I saw Robin nodding massively there. If the arts are an important vehicle for children's well-being post-pandemic, there are crises happening in children's lives every day. There are children. We have, I've just done a big project with in a secondary school with young children from a refugee background. A school that's 70% young people from a refugee background. Those kids are in crisis almost every day. They've got nowhere to sleep. They're couch surfing. Their mates are being arrested. Their visas are being withdrawn. Those children are living in a crisis world. And that Why Connect project, if anyone's interested in reading about that, that was all about wellbeing through the arts, but it was in partnership with artists. So let's not forget that we've got a lot of artists who themselves have been through hell in this country, and I'm sure in New Zealand and in other places as well. And I know my good friend and colleague Elaine, who's trying to keep her company going there in Singapore, working with artists. They are a fantastic resource, and maybe one of the things we need to do is really start lobbying government to look at how we can embrace artists in schools in really powerful ways as well, as an ongoing way of kind of working in a reciprocal relationship with teachers and young people. So, there's kids in crisis every day in our schools, and there's a lot of sources of those crises. And if it's good, and if the government, you're very lucky, Peter, that you've got an education minister who's supporting that. But I think we all need to advocate really strongly, not just now, but for a stronger place for the arts across all sectors of schooling all of the time as a huge aspect of well-being, but also because it actually works really well for engagement, motivation and learning as well. So it's a win-win. I just don't understand why we're not getting cut through on that. But anyway, that's me. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts, reflections before we finish up? Probably got time for one or two if anyone wants to throw in. We've stunned them into submission, Peter and Julie, as per normal. Thank you for such a nourishing, really, afternoon of thinking and excitement about what's possible. Robin, did you want to add your thanks?
Well, I think it has been wonderful. I suppose I'd just like to say it's not only for when children are in crisis. I agree that children are having crises all the time, but it's for all time. The arts should be at the centre of what's happening in education, and we have the research to show that. And I agree, Julie, that in Australia, we need to be much stronger advocates for doing something about that, because the government's reaction, in terms of supporting artists, for example, has actually, and what's happening in higher education as well, has been to cut the arts in lots of ways. And so I think we have a lot of work to do, and I guess that's part of the work that CREATE wants to do, Michael.
Exactly. And Sue's asked a great question. What's the next steps? Well, I think the next steps, there's a few next steps if you want to take them. Join CREATE, because that's what we're about doing. We're about getting out the idea, engage with Peter's Centre, which is the Centre of Arts and Social Transformation. When this video comes out, which will be in the next 2 days on the YouTube channel, tweet it out, send it out on your social networks, and advocate. Use this as an advocacy platform, if you like, to get out the word that actually the arts are an incredibly kind of useful, effective way, not only to deal with kids in crisis, but to support kids throughout their schooling and beyond, of course. So, so there are things we can do. There are things that we can do on a daily basis. It's about kind of working together and collaborating and making it possible. Because I think even though sometimes we get disheartened, there's been a lot of traction in New Zealand for Torito Toy, as Peter's been saying, and in certain parts, and that's also been an international thing. So I think it's possible. We just have to find the ability to organise and push forward. So thanks again to Peter. Thanks again to Julie. It's wonderful to have had everybody here. And I hope you take the opportunity to join CREATE. And I also hope that you take the opportunity to send this video to your friends and your colleagues in the next few weeks. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a great evening, afternoon, etc. Bye.